do what you do, just don't let it control you.
What are you talking about?
Smoking in a bong or blunt.
Grass. Dank. Reefer.
Was his job it just means like pass the fucking joint.
Ganja. Hash.
Fucking awesome.
Hello and welcome back. This week I'm talking with Tarris Batiste, who wrote a book called Don't Let It Smoke You, about his evolving relationship with weed over the years. We talked about how he went from smoking with friends in high school to failing drug tests in football in college, and how he realized that maybe it wasn't as good as a role in his life as he thought. This conversation is super important one to have because it shows that weed is not always a good thing in people's lives. Tarris shares how he's been able to find that good balance in using in cannabis now. I'll have a link to his book and his contact info if you're interested in redefining your own relationship with weed. So have a good one. Bye. All right. Hello. All right. So today I'm having a conversation with Tarris Batiste, and Tarris wrote a book called Don't Let It Smoke You, Creating a Nontoxic Relationship with Cannabis, that I got a little over, I don't know, like a month ago, and I finished it this morning, and I'm excited to talk to you about it. So Tarris, tell us more about what got you into writing this book.
Yeah, thank you for having me on too, Whitney. And essentially what I was going through a time where I was smoking weed nonstop, and it was kind of getting in the way of what I wanted to do in my life moving forward or in my career. Mm-hmm. So I started to see who I was around and how many other people was dealing with this. And it was a lot of us at that time. So I was like, let me put all this mess into a message and create this book. And that's what got me here. Yeah.
All right. Awesome. So it's really interesting to read your journey with weed because it's like so different from my journey with weed. And so it's like really good to like, oh yeah, remember other people have different experiences with weed. And so I really appreciate you going into detail about your own kind of history with it.
Sure.
But yeah, you started out talking about how you started seeing some of the older basketball players and they were smoking and like that's what got you kind of interested in that. Yes.
Yes.
And sorry, it's on page 8. Said like it was a big deal to be noticed by the high schoolers. They were pros in my eyes. And then you said like meeting this guy Wild was the start of this new beginning. And it reminded me, and I don't know if you had this experience like once you started smoking when you were around people who are younger than you. There's this thing called the campsite rule where it's like if you're the older, like leave it better than you found it, especially with people who are younger than you. And so like with people who are like older or like have some kind of like power position, it's like really important to make sure that you're like leaving a good example, especially for people who are younger than you. Right. And so obviously these older students had this impact on you. And so like how did you kind of like interact with younger people after you had that experience?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. I think more of so in terms of cannabis and dealing with younger people, I think nobody wants to hear no about anything that they do. Mm-hmm. So I think that was the approach that I kind of took up on it. Like, hey, just make sure you're controlling this. Just make sure you have a grasp of this. Just make sure you know who you are. Yeah. So that's what I was pushing for the most part to the younger generation. Just so I don't tell them what to do, like I'm their parent or their guardian, you know? Right. And that was like, you were in middle school when that happened, right? Yeah, I was in middle school when I first started. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. So like consistently, but you know, it's when I first started to kind of get into it and learn how to roll up, et cetera. Yeah. And so it then became this thing where like, you know, you had more of your friends who were doing this and you say on like page 12, you know, after something happened, like failed to execute in sports or had a bad practice or game, then you'd look at each other and say, it's not that serious. We'll smoke this off tonight. Right. And it's just like such an interesting perspective. And then you start going through some of your friends here. You have Q, Run, Ant. And so
how you saw cannabis affecting their lives in different ways. And so so yeah, tell us more about like what you saw and kind of like how you made sense of that at the time.
Yeah. So to go back to my friends, when when you don't have to say anything when they're your real friends, you don't have to say anything. You just look at each other and you're like, okay, you know what I mean by that, right? I think
Uh-huh.
every friendship bond knows what I mean by that. But going back to your point, I kind of so when I started growing up, going through high school, you kind of started to see how we was using, right? Some people would use around each other, use around friends. Some people would only use around the women to be cool. And
Oh.
then some people kind of distanced themselves when they started to use, right? Started to drift a little bit. Their personalities, who they were, started to change. And I started to notice that. And I wanted to make sure I wasn't changing myself. And I didn't find that out until later on in the life, but that's what I started to notice with the friends or the groups that I was hanging around with at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. That one of the things that, when we ask about, should people like looking at like especially grades, not grade school, like school age kids, like high school, there's research that's like kids who smoke weed are like less likely to succeed academically. And then whenever I've kind of thought of that, I'm like, I have two PhDs. Like I'm like I smoke every day and like I don't believe this kind of thing. And
Yeah.
so it was good to like read that perspective of just like, oh yeah, no, this like like really can affect people. And one of the things I always think about is like a chicken or the egg kind of situation. Like, are people like dealing with like hard, shit that like you turn to cannabis to like help it? And so like, or is it like cannabis is the thing that leads you down the path, or is it like I'm down a weird path and like I'm using this thing to help me cope?
For
So
sure.
what are your thoughts on like that chicken or the egg kind of perspective?
I actually hear that a lot and I get that a lot. I think no matter which way you go, there's going to be some type of individualism control that has to be put in place for yourself to not go to the next thing.
Yeah.
Or since we know mushrooms are coming in the world, right? I'm not going to talk about that, but it's coming, right? Psychedelics. So you're going to say, weed's not for me, drink's not for me no more. Let's do psychedelics now, or let's do herbal tea now. So I think you're going to have to kind of control that no matter what it is, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, last time we talked, we were talking about like having different tools in the toolbox. Like, don't expect that weed is going to solve all your problems, or like mushrooms in that case too. Like, it's like, do you have a good support system? Are you still talking with your friends? Are you still connecting with people in your community? Are you, exercising? Are you eating well? So it's like it's not going to solve your problems. And I
Right.
think, you did that. You did like a really good job of describing how when people are using like your friends from high school, it's like it started to really affect them in some kind of negative ways. And so
Sure.
as I was reading it, I was like, where are these people now? Are you still friends with them? Like, are they doing all right?
That's actually a good question. The book kind of made a little distance into our friendship, but for the ones who understand it and kind of matured with us as we went with them using as well, they understand it for sure. So
Okay.
some
But
friends are okay and some are, it's how it
yeah,
goes.
some were like, you're I don't know.
You're different now. You're
Okay.
different.
All
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just leave it there. Yeah, I think that you kind of mentioned this kind of throughout the whole book about how you had a bunch of your friends who were smoking weed with you, and how that social element can encourage people to use maybe more than they would want to or something.
Sure.
And how uh it was hard for you to stop using when you were around your friends who were like using weed all the time.
Right. Made me think of something when you said that, um, you're all about fitness, right? I actually seen that on your page. You're all about moving, right? And staying active. But social fitness is a thing too, you know.
Yeah.
So being able to navigate that and who to set boundaries around, and it's a whole nother thing, but it goes back to the relationship aspect with the people, the plant, etc. So that's how I kind of look at it for sure. And I still try to modify my social fitness now. It's like sports teams, right? I'm just using this because I remember sports teams change every year. They change their roster. to try to get better, right? And I think you as an individual should kind of do that the same. I'm not talking about a dating roster here, Whitney, okay? I'm not
Yeah,
talking,
yeah.
you know what I'm saying for sure.
Yeah,
No,
absolutely. Yeah,
that's
like
major.
the people you have in your life absolutely make a have an impact on how
Yeah,
you act as well. I think at some point my dad was like, "You're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with,"
I
and
know.
so like to find those people and be mindful of who you're spending your time with.
Right.
Um, and so on like page 14 and 15, you start going into trying to get right before your parents got home, or like then your mom knew the whole time. What was
Yeah.
how did your parents talk to you about weed growing up?
Yeah, my parents was against it, completely against it. My dad was he was a he was in law enforcement, and my mom, of course, kind of followed suit. Not into industry, but listen to what he said. He kind
Yeah.
of controlled the house. So, um, yeah, they were completely against it. Yeah.
Wow. And so did you guys have any, you said that your mom knew the whole time. Did she
Yeah, she
say
kinda knew.
anything to you, or
I
like
was so young, Whitney. Like I would hotbox and walk into the house, not think about the smell. I think, right? I would me and a couple of my friends, I would, now you understand, like you gotta wash your fingertips, you gotta make sure your breath doesn't smell. But at that time, I was overlooking all that, and that's how she knew for sure.
Yeah. And it's I think you say something on the like on page 73 about like how, oh maybe it was sometime later. Oh no, where it if you had access to all the different ways to get high now, like you don't know, like it's like if edibles were around, like when we were in high school, it's like, oh my gosh, like wouldn't have to worry about the like smell or anything. And so like what are some things that you think that younger folks are dealing with now that are maybe different from us trying to like hide the smell when we were younger?
Yeah, I remember in college, right? I got kicked out of a couple apartments in college, and almost the college dorm because of smoking, right? I just
Okay, wow. Okay, wait, hold on. You have this parent in law enforcement, and then like so I didn't start smoking weed until college, and I'm grateful for that for a lot of reasons, but I'm such like a rule follower. Like it was just like I don't want to get in trouble with my parents, and so like that was like the biggest thing. So like how do you go from having this like I have to follow rules to like now I'm getting almost kicked out of places?
yeah, I never really followed the rules. I would obey the rules, right? But I wouldn't always follow them, right? And sometimes they kind of became my own rules. And
Okay.
um and I've always been like that, right? Just always been that way. But when I got to college, I really started to, because I couldn't smoke inside the home growing up, right? The parents weren't against it, so I would have to hide it and do it other ways, right? And when I come back in, that's when my mom would notice, hey, your eyes red, you smell on a consistent daily, weekly basis. Okay, she's like, okay, my son smokes. As I got to college, I finally could say, okay, damn, I can smoke and relax now. Mom's not
Mhm.
on my back, dad's not on my back. So that's what I started to do. However, smells, I didn't understand that, how it can linger. I remember using a dry sheet, putting a dry sheet in the toilet.
Yep.
Yep. I remember doing that, right? That lasted for like 2 days, and smell. So, but going to now, what I wish I had that the kids have access to now, they have the vapes,
Mhm.
right? Which is, I don't know. Do you think the vapes are a good thing? I don't know yet. I'm still like trying to figure it out.
I'm still trying to figure it out too. There's like not a lot of research on it. It's like it gets sketchy when people have to go off market to find it, like
Right.
when you're like when you don't go through like a regulated, you don't know what you're actually smoking if you don't buy it at a store. And so I think that's where people have like some bad things coming their way, but I don't know. I know that there's like different ways to process it to turn it into vaporizing format, and I just like don't know. Once things turn too chemical, I'm like I kind of black out and don't remember anything,
I
so I
get that.
can't really tell. But yeah, it's I think it's when it's like easy to like smoke kind of like regularly throughout the day, like with a vape pen or something like that, then like yeah, you're gonna have more access to it.
Have more access. You're gonna be able to hide it more, which means you're gonna use it more.
Yeah, and the hiding part is a really interesting aspect of it. Have you heard of the phrase set and setting?
Mm-mm.
So it kind of came out of the psychedelic kind of world about like your internal set, like how you are as like as a person, and then your setting, like where are you physically, and that can influence someone's experience on psychedelics. And so I've seen the same thing with relationship to cannabis, where it's like, yeah, if you're in a setting where you have to now hide how like what you're doing, then that can affect the way that you're even experiencing the drug.
I love
And
that.
so yeah, I'm really curious about the like if you have to hide it, then it's gonna make you live your life in kind of sketchier ways because now you have to like hide part of who you are
Sure.
rather than like having that setting of like this is a supportive place, that set of like I'm safe, I'm not gonna get in trouble right now. It like leads to a completely different experience with weed.
For sure. If you have a very strong family foundation, then maybe you be able to learn that at the beginning. But I think for the most part, I think people grow through that, right? Figure
Yeah,
out who they really are and how they can act like they really are and stuff like that. You know what I
right.
mean by that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then you start talking about your experience with like looking up research, and you're like, I didn't want to find anything about that was bad about weed, but turns out there is some there are some things.
There
And
are
so I
some
really
health
like the
benefits.
way that you went through your own research and the way you described the like cannabis legalization in the United States. Like your description of it is like really accessible. So I really enjoyed the way that you were able to break that down. It was a really enjoyable read in that part. And so you start talking about playing football, and I think you said something like that like 20 out of the 100 players didn't smoke weed.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
wild to me. Were y'all not like drug tested or like what? Tell me more about that.
Yeah. So we were drug tested. Sometimes we were warned when we were drug tested, and I still failed. And
And then what happens if you fail your drug test?
yeah, so depending on which position you're in on the team, right? Sometimes it's just a slap on the wrist. Sometimes you got to go do right. So I failed a couple. I ended up actually having to go to rehab in college
What
for
was
cancer.
that like?
Yeah, so it only lasted 2 days, and
Okay.
then I was like, I'm not going no more. It goes back to that me doing my own thing. That's probably not a good thing, right? But it was there. It was okay. It was just very awkward because the person I was talking to never used cannabis.
Mm.
So I didn't feel any type of tie or any direction to where I was saying. So I was like, it's not for me. But I definitely figured out I had a problem in college, a serious problem. And a couple people on the team did as well, just to be
Yeah.
honest. Yeah.
Yeah. And so how did you know that like you had a problem in how do you make that distinction between like having a problem versus not having a problem?
I think what you kind of become a slave of is a problem.
Mhm.
It's a person, certain thing, a drink, whatever. And I was kind of a slave to it, Whitney, just to be honest. I don't like talking about this part, but I would run to it.
Yeah.
One little bad thing happened, I would run to it. Right. And it's just you
Yeah.
kind of don't in certain people's eyes, especially when you start dating or you start growing and maturing, you don't look too good when you run to it. So that was a kind
Right.
of wake
So
up
like
point.
were people kind of noticing that in you, or was it mostly like from your own self or
Friends like, Tarris, you gonna come out? I say, yeah, I'm gonna come out after I smoke my first blunt. It's like, I'm not going nowhere. You know, so that on a consistent basis in different scenarios is definitely started to show more, and it started to be a problem.
Yeah, man. Yeah, and I think towards the end of the book you're talking about like balancing weed and your priorities. Like it sounded like you weren't staying on top of the things that really actually mattered to you and like things that you really valued and
Right.
just using weed to kind of replace that. And I noted here on page 63 you say if I wanted to smoke it had to be after I checked off tasks that I thought were valuable to my growth for that day. And I
Exactly.
really like that description. So rather than like using weed like before you ate breakfast to like help you like eat, because that was another thing you said in here, that it's like, all right, I need to like what do I need to do for the day? And like, what are my priorities actually for the day? And like, if I want to, I can use afterward. Tell me more about that experience and kind of where you are right now with weed.
Yeah, so it took me a little bit to get over that, especially as I was writing the book. It took 8 years to write the book, and I was still using nonstop, right? So sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna smoke today. I'm not gonna write. Sometimes I'm just gonna write today. I'm not gonna smoke. And doing the research definitely opened my eyes to more ways to use. So I kind of got a little bit more excited. I can smoke this way. I can smoke that way. Yeah, it was definitely it was tough. But I would say I kind of got to a point, Whitney, where I was like, I'm trying to make sure I say this in a way that understandable. That I was you kind of make it a reward,
Yeah.
right? You make your use a reward, and that's what I started to do. But I had to get things done before I actually did that. And also it was a problem. Like I couldn't eat. Like you can't eat before you smoke. Like that has to be a problem, right?
Right.
So I
Mm-hmm.
had to kind of shake that too. And that's what I did. It took a while. It took 2 or 3 years
Yeah.
to consistently shake that. And this is what I'm saying, Whitney. I go a little bit more depth. So let's say, hey, Tarris wants to stop for a week. Let's say I get to day 3 and I accidentally use. I know a lot of us, what we'll do is we'll say, damn, I got to start the week over again. I don't do that. Like I'll
Right.
just start from there and just keep going. It's kind of like I use basketball. When they miss a shot, they don't say, hey, I have 0 points. They just keep adding as they continue to make. So that's how I started to change my approach. And that's what got me to this point where I'm at today.
Yeah, I loved your description of like failure, that like most failure is accompanied with a sense of loss or shame, but that's not how we should view it. If you're learning and changing lifestyle patterns, failure is only bad if you keep making the same mistakes and aren't progressively learning from it.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, and that's kind of my area of teaching is motor learning, and so when you want to learn something, you're not going to be good at something right away, and so like we don't. You like brought up the example of like toddlers. Like if a toddler just like stopped trying to walk, like toddlers just keep on getting back up and walking, and so and one of the cool things about toddlers persisting with walking when they're so skilled at crawling is
Mhm.
that like there's things that life expands when you start to walk, and so like they're able to use their hands more, they're able to do other things, and so it's like it's of their best interest to keep on walking because more things open up. So yeah, like what other things have like opened up for you since you've kind of been able to get this cannabis use under control?
Yeah, I think the cannabis industry opened up, right? Other shit's just like, and I moved out here to Seattle. So that was tough. It's like, okay, make sure you got your control down pack. You just wrote the book. Make sure you're sticking to what you wrote.
Yeah.
Um, and as you see, everybody's starting to create their new cultivar, their new strain, right? Everybody's
Mhm.
creating that. It's exciting to try it too. But what I do now is I continue to watch how much I use and when I use. I think the power of when is big for me. Like when can you use and still get things done, and when can you use and feel like a little down or not yourself? Let's just say that.
Yeah.
So the power of when is what I lean on now. I still smoke to this day,
Mhm.
right? I just kind of know when I can do it for me, not for my friends or my groups or going out at this club or that club, but I know when to do it for me and make it valuable for myself. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And so I know that you've talked to some high school athletes, and so any high school or college athletes who might be listening, what's your advice to them?
My advice is do what you do, just don't let it control you. Anything, right? And then I would leave with if you ever have any questions around your use, reach out to me at don'tletitsmokeyou@gmail.com and we can just have a little dialogue about it. I think it'd be helpful for sure.
Yeah, I definitely think it's helpful to have kind of like that what I was saying earlier with the campsite rule. It's like with an older person who's like kind of been through it, like you're going to be more respected. You're not going to be like that person you had when you were going through the like rehab in football, where it's like you've not used this, like you don't actually know what you're talking about.
Right.
Like
Exactly.
you have that personal experience, you've like gone through your own stuff, and so I think that you're a great asset to to young folks who are like, you're using your age and your experience like for the betterment of people who are younger than you. So
Sure.
really acknowledge that. Like it's really a great thing that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what's next for you?
Yeah, we're gonna make this book into a movie.
Ooh, yeah.
Right. Cannabis is becoming legal everywhere around the world. And I think it's just a matter of time before, like they did with gambling, like 1-800, if you're gambling too much, they're gonna do the same thing with cannabis, right? And I want
There's
the
already
book.
like 12-step programs. There's a cannabis anonymous program.
There you go. I'm hopefully I can get the book to come into a movie for something that actually went through it, rather than someone who's actually in the position to, put a procedure around it, but may not have went through it. So
Right.
that's what I'm looking to do right now. Meeting great people like yourself, getting the book out there, and we'll see how it goes. Yeah.
All right. Wonderful. All right. Anything else you want to share or anything like that?
Yeah, last thing. I
Yes.
think this will be helpful. So the plant's growing with us hand in hand, right? So nobody's really an expert, right? So just be mindful of that as you continue to use, as you continue to research and learn for yourself. I think it'll put you in a good position. Yeah.
Yeah. I think anyone who, even myself, who like I'm like I, to a certain extent, I'm an expert in
Sure.
cannabis and exercise, but like there's so much that like we actually don't know about cannabis, and so like anyone who says that they're an expert, just kind of be aware. I always think that in terms of like how things are being marketed, it's like, this helps with your focus. It's like, we've not actually done the research on it. Like, please stop telling people that like this product helps with focus. Like, that makes no sense.
Right.
And so yeah, I think it's continue to like broaden your perspectives, and that's what I really admire about what you did here, is like I specifically went out and found people who were going to tell me things that I didn't want to hear about weed. And so keep your mind open, keep your ears open for things, for people who are saying, things that you agree with, and also things that you might kind of want to push back against as well.
For sure. And Whitney, if you see anything in your research or in your day-to-day life, send it over. Hey, Tarris, check this out. You might be interested. I would love to read it and learn from it.
Then will do. Cool.
Thank you for your
Perfect.
time.
All right. Well, and so I know that you have to get back to work, so I'll let you go. But I really look forward to seeing how we can use the research and use some like personal experience to help other people moving forward. So I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more, you can follow me on Instagram at Exploring Cannabis and Exercise, or at Dr. Ogle. Or you can visit my website at whitneyogle.com. If you want to support this podcast, you can sign up for Patreon at patreon.com/exploring cannabis and exercise. This podcast was produced by Haley Montowski, and the music used on this podcast is called Bonfire Cauliflower, created by Isaac Joel. Make good choices out there.